Shalom, everyone. It's January 24th, 2022. We are talking about Parashat Mishpatim, but we're going to focus first on doing a little recap of last week and focus towards the end of Parsha, Mishpatim, and also really look at, I think, one of the key ideas of Mount Sinai, and also I think one of the key ideas, the key metaphors to really unlock the whole Bible for us. So I want to say that this is the most important class you'll ever take, but last week was, and next week will be too. Okay. So with no further ado, here we go. To recap. So the people are afraid at some point while or after the 10 precepts are spoken. Okay? So just to recap, this is, they've gone to the mountain and Moses has gone up. And the way I described it last week was he goes up and God is about to say whatever he's about to say. And the people have been brought close to the mountain, but they're already starting to get afraid. And God says to Moses, go down and tell them not to go too close, lest I break forth. And Moses says to God, look, I've told them that already. No, go down and tell them. And it's at that point that the Torah has the 10 statements. And then at the end of that, we have this. And while the Torah, literature cannot do for us what video does. Video, if this were a video moment, you'd have a split screen. Okay, so the best way I think I can explain this is that this is the Torah coming close to giving us a split screen. We have one action taking place on the mountain and another set of action taking place below the mountain or at the foot of the mountain. And this is taking place simultaneously. So the noise and the fire and the smoke and everything is coming out of the mountain at one point, and they can't hear. And so they're totally puzzled and totally shocked and totally scared. So a text can't give you a split screen. But what it does is try in its limited way to convey to you that there's simultaneous action going on. And while the words are spoken, we have this. All the people witness the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, the mountain smoking. Kolotet lapidim. Lapidim is also torches. Okay, Yair Lapid is the foreign minister of Israel. That's Lapid, that's his name. When the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. And the translation is a little weak here. Vayar ha'am vayanu. Vayanu, is to shake. Okay? Here they translate it as fell back. I should really put it in and say they were quaking, they were shaking, they were moving back and forth, they were shuddering. It's like when you wave a lulav, that's shaking. You're terrified. Vayanu, vayamdu merachok. We can't underestimate the power of these words. They're so terrified of the mountain that they want to move back. And this is, I mentioned this on Shabbos, I'll mention it again here. This is how God gets the whole people wrong. God thinks that they're going to be uninhibited, and that because they see such a glorious, magnificent sight, they're going to want to come up to the mountain. It's akin to saying, and as I explained it on Shabbos, it's like watching a great spectacle, a play or a concert, and you want to be part of it, and so you no longer want to sit in the audience. You want to join the stage, and we have child educators here. That is an experience that you see with children. Children, can't restrain themselves, and that's an also experience when you are so wrapped up in a moment. And that's also experienced when you had a little bit too much to drink, right? Which, has happened sometimes at these large, concerts where people are so entranced, there's no division between what's going on the stage and what's going on in the audience. They want to go on the stage. They want to get up and dance. They want to do that. And that, I think, is what God has perceived. God has said, it's going to be so amazing, right? And instead of it being so amazing that people want to break forth, the opposite happens. The people are so terrified, they will move back, okay? And it's a crowd, and so the crowd is moving back the way a crowd will do when it's terrified, okay? And what they managed to get the message to Moses, you speak to us, they said to Moses, Vayomru Moshe, and we will obey. V'nishma'a, we will hear you, really, okay? But let not God speak to us, let us die, right? We don't want God speaking to us. We will listen to you. In other words, I mentioned this, they were not able to hear the statements being spoken. They want something, they want to get some of what's going on here, but it's too overwhelming for them. So they want to set back, and they want to set Moses up as an intermediary, and that Moses, in effect, will function as God to them, because Moses is not going to kill them. But God, they're afraid, will kill them. Moses answered the people, he said, be not afraid, for God has come only in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may be ever with you, so that you do not go astray. It's a strange line here, okay? But he's saying, he says, don't be afraid, because it's an idea that the whole experience was to test you, to make you afraid, okay? In other words, this moment is to be an instructive moment so that you will have, quote, the fear of God. And that is to say, your own future behavior will be motivated by a set of boundaries. We'll get into that shortly. So Moses, the people remained at a distance, Vayamod Amerachok, while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. And so, on the one hand, I want to be able to give you lots of visual information and pictures of this. On the other hand, I'm so aware as I talk about it how if I present pictures, I will limit your understanding, I'll limit the imagination of it. And that's why I said last week, I appreciate so much the movie, but the movie did so much damage in terms of understanding of the Bible, because the movie kind of fixes in a person's imagination one way of seeing it. And here I think also this is part of the reason why the Bible is so strongly against the visual depiction of God in an idol. Because if you have a visual depiction of God, it will freeze itself into your mind. And that's how you'll never think of God in any other way but the image in front of you. And that's devastating to human imagination. It's devastating to life. It's contrary to what we experience throughout our life, which is that the way we perceive God as adults is different from children, is different from adolescents, different from every other time in our lives. And so part of this, it's hard not to even think about this, is that we have such visual, information conveyed here in text, and if I had the pictures of it, it would take away from the text and not add to the text, okay? The same way that a visual depiction of God takes away from God and doesn't add to God, okay? So our point is that they're terrified, and that in their terror, they want Moses to speak to them, and that's how last week's Parsha ended. But I want to focus on the idea of fire, okay? And recall that the people were afraid just before they were spoken to, the words were spoken to. All right, and the third day is the morning dawn. This is, they've been told to prepare for 3 days, and on the third day, it's morning. There's thunder, there's lightning, a dense cloud upon the mountain, and the loud blast of the horn. This is prior to Moses going back up. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their place at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was all in smoke. Mipnei asher yarad alav Hashem ba'esh, because the Lord had come down upon it in fire. So again, it's visual in your imagination. It's Moses going up and fire is coming down. It's contrary to the way fire goes. Fire goes up, but here we have fire. I mean, the flames are going up, but it's like, I mean, I don't want to say it this way, but it's like a big spaceship. The capsule. I mean, the capsule of what was it in the Saturn V rocket? It was like the capsule, the module was coming down, and it's burning, and so it's kind of landing on the mountain, and Moses is going up, and so what the viewer sees, the people see, is that there's a meeting going on, and it's the human is meeting God, and the metaphor, which is, or the information which is being conveyed here in the limited way that the Torah can convey a theological and undefinable moment, is that there's some kind of meeting going on here. Fire is coming down. The people see it, they tremble. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their place at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke. The Lord had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose out like a smoke of a kiln, and I'm sure you've seen what that is. It's just billowing, and the blare of the horn, etc., etc., etc. And the Lord said, and this is what I just quoted to you, Lord said, go down, warn the people not to break through, thinking that they actually want to come out. And that's what happens, okay? And this is, Moses went down to the people and spoke to them, and it's at precisely that point that we have the 10 statements made. Okay, now, so this was before. What I showed you at the beginning was after, right? They said, Moses, you go up, we'll be fine, okay? And then at the end of everything, in this week's Parsha, you have God saying, so they make a ceremony, okay? The ceremony where Moses kind of reads out the 10 commandments to the people, and perhaps other matters that are part of the legislation in this chapter. And then God says to Moses, come up to the Lord with Aaron, the dove, and Avihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with them. So, Moses went up, Moses went down. Moses went down, Moses went up, and Moses comes down again, and he tells everything to the people, and God says, come on back up, and I'm going to give you the tablets and the words. Moses went and repeated the people all the commands of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice, saying, all the things that the Lord has commanded we will do. Moses then wrote down all the commands of the Lord. Early in the morning he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in the basin, and dashed the other part against the altar. He took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. So what you have here is effectively a ceremony. There's slaughter of animals, there's blood, and there's the declaration. The declaration of all the things that God has said. And the people say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do, which is the famous words, Kol asher diber Adonai naaseh v'nishma. Okay, and I'm not focusing on that because we could certainly spend a lot of time on that. Then he took the record. Moses took the blood, dashed it on the people, and he said, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord now makes with you concerning all these commands. So I have to understand that what we are experiencing in terms of our reading and in our imagination is that there was a state, a moment that was intended to happen one way. It happens another way. We kind of redo it, and do it another way. And Moses creates a ceremony that is the binding ceremony. The people are still quite confused because in in front of them the mountain is still on fire. Okay. Then Moses and Aaron and Nadav and Avihu and the 70 elders ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there was likeness of pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. That's a very complicated verse, lots to explain there, but I'm not going to do that. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the teachings and commandments which I have scribed to instruct them." So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose, and Moses ascended the mountain of God. To the elders he said, "Wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them." When Moses has ascended the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. The presence of the Lord abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid it for 6 days. On the seventh day he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. Now the presence of the Lord appeared in the sight of Israelites as a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain, and Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay? So just the Vayishkon, Vayal Moshe goes up, Vayechas Ha'anan et Ahar. The cloud covers the mountain. All right, so we kind of have like this, rendezvous. Moses is in the cloud, okay, and Moses is alone with God. The elders and Nadav and Avihu they're on the middle of the mountain. The people are still at the base of the mountain, and that has important significance. But we're not going to get into that. What we have then is the people have done their initial ceremony. They accept this, even though they don't understand it, even though they have failed to hear, but they're accepting, okay? And the bottom line is that Moses goes up, he spends 6 days in the middle somewhere, and then the seventh day the cloud lifts and he goes up to the top of the mountain, and that's where he's going to be for 40 days and 40 nights, okay? And I've bolded here or highlighted that the appearance of God is like a consuming fire. And that motif of God as a consuming fire occurs all the time. So what's going on here? All right, so let me just stop and see if you have any questions so far in terms of this reading. Are you all with me in terms of, yes, go ahead, Alana.
So the purpose of this whole experience is to make the children of Israel believe in the existence of God, but through fear.
Correct. I'm going to reframe it in just one slight way, which is the whole purpose of this is that they know God, okay? That they get an experience that lets them know God. I want to say that if you've ever met a great person, okay, this is the analogy, which is you can never really know a great person, but if you come into contact with a great individual, it's not that some of it will rub off on you, but you'll get a fragment, you'll get just some understanding, okay, and there is some of this at play here, which is it's relational, right? And God, I feel sorry for God. God wants so much to be loved and so much to be respected and revered. But the people are terrified. Imagine it's like, and Alana, you're a teacher, so and I'm a teacher, and we have other teachers here. We've got a lot of teachers here. Okay. So part of the experience of being a teacher is that you want your students to like you, but you also want your students to respect you, so that they won't crawl all over you. Okay, so and clearly the first days of the school year are really, really critical in establishing a set of boundaries. You don't want to terrify them, right? But you also don't want to make them think that you are putty, right? And that you're just they can walk over you. This is the dynamic that's at play in every relationship. It's there's I want closeness, but I also want boundaries, okay? And God, because God is so other, God is saying, look, I want them to know me, but they can't know me because if you know me, you'll get killed. So I need a boundary. And the people don't get to that place. They're so afraid they have to retreat. And they say, here, Moses, you stand in between us because we can't handle it. Okay. And so what happens is Moses does stand in front of them. Moses does repeat the words. And Moses, it's very interesting, gives them tactile, tangible things. Blood is very tactile. And, cutting animals and burning them is very, very, physical for them. They can understand that and they can relate to that. And that's an experience that somehow touches them and literally blood on them, making them blood of the covenant, says, okay, this is how you're related to us. And so what is the attempt here is to set up this relationship in a way that they're not going to be terrified to the point that they don't want anything of this. They just want to get closer. I don't know if that answers it. John, go ahead. You have to unmute.
I have to unmute.
This is a somewhat sacrilegious comment on the magic moment, but I was thinking about this. It just dawned on me that God could be sued for consumer fraud because he told them all the good things that'll flow if they accept his offer, but he doesn't say anything about the negative consequences.
Yes.
And if God had given full disclosure, and if the people had time to reflect on the pros and the cons of accepting the offer, they might not have accepted. And if they had a good lawyer, they might have gotten out of the deal.
This is so important, because it's really how the story is going to unfold. And, we have to kind of strip away this idea that God, knew everything that was going to happen and that this is all, God's perfect also. No, the Torah is presenting God really learning how to be God as much as the people are also learning how to be the people. I know how I mean, it's not sacrilege. It's almost like, not sacrilegious, but apostasy to say this. But if you landed from Mars and read the Torah, that's what you would understand, and that's how I think our ancestors understood this prior to the contact with Western philosophy. They're reading the Torah not the way that we modern, Western people read it. They're reading it as like, okay, everybody's a work in progress. Everybody's learning as they go, and that God wants to make known His essence to them. But there are two sides to this essence. One side is that God will devour you, and another side is that God will sustain you. And that's what you would say is that's the full disclosure here. And they're not getting the other side. And we're going to get into that in a second. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right.
I just want to say it reminds me of Avinu Malkeinu.
Exactly. And so that's one, our Father, our King, one manifestation of, or one expression of this is, I'm terrified, but I need you. Go ahead, Marlene, you had a question.
How much did the people really know that God had given the other side that John just spoke of, that there was going to be anything good? He told that to Moses, he told that to Abraham, but this is a generation of people who grew up after the generation or two that had died in slavery.
So they don't know anything. They have not had this.
All they know is the death part.
They know they know also the salvation part. So God is, if they've, like, put yourself Marlene, put yourself as one of the people in the Exodus, okay? And you go like, this is good. Okay, we're going to be free. All right, yeah, there's a lot of terror and destruction here. But I guess, from what he's saying, Moses, this is what God is doing. And God is fulfilling a promise that he made to our ancestors. So I have two pieces of information. That God fulfills his promises, good. And God terrifies everybody and is also destructive. Okay, so I get some of it now, all right? But now, God, so Moses has told us, and the word is out that he's taking us out of Egypt in order to bring us to the land of Israel, and in order that God may know us also, or that we may know God. So now we're going to know God. So this entity that has brought us out and given us freedom, which is also destroyed, he's going to make himself known to us, and we're going to know that. Okay, so I'm interested. I'm interested. And then you go to the mountain, you go like, oh, I'm not like I'm terrified. It's too overwhelming. Okay.
Still, we were told at the time to make the quote Seder,
Yes.
and to be ready, because when your children ask you in the future, that was the only time that I can think of that they were given any physical things to do to hold on to, that they would have a relationship.
Yes.
That they went out of Egypt and they passed through on the Yabashah, we know that they started to complain right away, so that it wasn't really internalized yet.
That's quite correct. They don't have any kind of internal or what we would call sophisticated or beyond a basic understanding. It's not. I want to say, they're not stupid, but they've also been slaves. They just don't know of the world in any other way. All right, let's go back into
justifier. The first time Moshe met God was in the burning bush.
Okay,
So
hold on.
very symbolic.
Well, we're going to get there. Okay, so I have been quoting Yoram Azoni in an essay that he writes about this topic, and he says as follows: the experience of God as a devouring fire is not restricted to the people. Moses, too, gets to see this side of God, as when God tells him that I will be angered by them and I will consume them because the people have made themselves a statue of gold and declared it to be their God. So we're jumping ahead a little bit, but in a couple of weeks when we have the golden calf episode, God says this, I will consume them, achalem, this is the text, Vata nichali vaychar api vahem v'achalem, I will destroy them, so it's like the people, what we're saying is that the people are seeing God as a fire, a consuming fire, destructive fire, and Moses is also going to see God as a destructive fire, or at least understand that God will be a destructive fire, because when the people sin, God's going to say, look, I'm going to just destroy them. I'm a destructive fire, okay? And we have other instances of God as a fire in the Torah, one which is back at the Song of the Sea. These are two verses in the middle. Uvarov gancha taros kamecha. In your great triumph, you break your opponent. Teshalach choroncha yochlemo kakash. You send forth your fury, it consumes them like a straw. So the Song of the Sea understands God as a consuming fire. Okay? So we're in the idea that this is a force beyond recognition. It's so powerful. And in Deuteronomy, it says this explicitly. Ki Adonai Elohecha esh ochlahu el kana. For the Lord, your God, is a consuming fire, an impassioned God. So the idea that God is a consuming fire already is implicit in biblical passages in Exodus. It's explicit in Deuteronomy when Moses is recalling Mount Sinai. And so the idea that everyone has to assume is that everybody already is aware that God, quote, is a consuming fire. Okay? And in Leviticus, God is actually a fire. When they offer the sacrifices and they do it incorrectly, Nadav and Avihu, God comes out as a fire. He consumes them, the burnt offering, and consumes them also. Okay? And this is true with the children of Aaron. He consumes them. God is consumes the sons of Aaron. So what we have here is this a very strong idea that God, it's not God is like a consuming fire, although giving it equivalent is it. God actually is God is an incredible power that is the closest that we can relate to is like fire. Okay, so and here Hazoni continues. God has not always appeared to Moses in this way. Moses' most characteristic vision of God is nearly the opposite of this. When he first climbs to the mountain of God to examine the burning bush, Moses sees that the bush burned with fire, but the bush was not consumed, exactly as Ilana said. His first vision of God is a vision of God as fire. The Hebrew term ukal, that I've translated here as consumed, is the same word that appears as ish ochelet, usually translated devouring fire, as well as in God's declaration that his anger will consume the people because of their sin of making the calf of gold. So back to chapter 3, Moshe hayaroeh tzon, Moses was tending the flock of his father Jethro, and the priest of Midian drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. So, it's so interesting. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this great sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? When the Lord saw he had turned aside to look, God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he's answered, here I am. All right, so, the Jewish Theological Seminary made this its emblem, okay? The bush was not consumed, and, I doubt that most people understand what this even means, okay? And some people take it to mean that, Israel, the people of Israel is no matter how much it faces persecution or oppression, it will still be eternal. But it's a lot deeper than just that. Okay, the idea that in all other instances the fire of God consumes everything, and in that this first instance the fire of God does not consume something. That is the point. That's what Azoni is trying to say. I'll say it again, which is everywhere in the Torah where God appears, God is an esh ochelet. At Mount Sinai, he's an esh ochelet. For the sacrifices, he's an esh ochelet. For the golden calf, he says, restrain me because I'm a consuming fire. But the first time God appears, he is an esh that is not ochelet. He is a fire that does not consume. And that arouses Moses' curiosity, and that is the vision. Okay, I'm gonna make it a little bit more explicit here as we go on. This is the rest of the thing. The image of God as a devouring fire is, in other words, an elaboration of the type contrast we have already seen opposing the people to Moses. Whereas the people see God as a consuming fire, Moses is able to see God as a fire that does not consume. And I've highlighted that sentence because I think that's really the core of the problem. The people only get one glimpse of God. It's like the teacher, right? The teacher stands before the classroom, and all you see of the teacher is that they are wrathful, and that they're strict, and that they're impossible, and that you'll never get an A in this class, right? Whereas if you kind of stand after class and talk to the teacher, that the teacher is kind, the teacher is patient, the teacher will invite you, for another discussion, etc. Okay, that there is another side to this, and that they're both the same individual. I've had people like this. I've had teachers like this. Okay, that were completely impossible and stern, but when you got got through, they were the nicest people. They were compassionate people, right? They had, and in a way, I don't want to say it this way, but it's the teacher has to come and present in a certain way, and present an aspect of the character. Yes, I believe in firmness. I believe in discipline. I believe in right and wrong and clear boundaries. And the teacher then has to be, yes, but I will be loving and embracing and compassionate to you. So Moses gets it, but the people do not get it. Whereas the people see God as a consuming fire, Moses sees God as a fire that does not consume. And here's the point. What is all this about? This all about? Why does Israel see God as a flame, at times a devouring flame, at times a flame that does not devour? So fire is a metaphor for God. Part of this is easy to understand. In the Bible, as in much other literature, fire is recognized as being a two-sided thing. On the one hand, it is a source of light and heat, and so gives us life. On the other, one cannot draw too close to a fire with being burned and destroyed. This is important, okay? Without fire, we can't live, all right? We live, look around in your own homes and look at your life. We have teamed energy in the form of fire to cook so that we can live, to light and heat our homes so that we won't face the elements. It's part of human evolution. Really is an understanding. Some evolutionary biologists believe that the invention of fire, the discovery of fire, was key to human evolution. This is something very, very deep, and that as soon as human beings understood that they could control fire, they could cook things. And cooking, as we all know, is a very efficient means of getting nutrition. Because when you cook something, you make things that are unpalatable palatable. You break down all the chemical components of the food in order to digest them easily. And that way, the things that demand the most energy and nutrition, namely your brain, get to expand. And that's how human beings evolved. Human beings evolved probably because of an initial discovery of fire, which happened some millions and millions of years ago, okay? But the point as a metaphor is that God is fire, and that I don't have to articulate this. This is one of the first things that you know as a creature. Fire keeps you warm, but fire can burn you. God will give you light and heat, but God will get too close, you will be destroyed. And that what is true of fire is also true of God, which is why he is compared to a fire. He is the source of things and so gives us life, but one cannot draw too close without being destroyed. Okay, so I have here as a little interlude. Love is like oxygen, right? We'll just do that for a second because I couldn't resist this. This piece of music, right? Because we have lots of metaphors for God, right? So you recall this crazy ditty from I can't get this out of my head. Right? Okay, that's about as much as we can handle. All right, love is like oxygen, right? In a way, God is like fire, but you get too much, you get too high, you're not enough, you're going to die. In other words, God is fire. If you get too much, you're going to get burned. Okay, if you don't get enough, you're going to die also. But you have to get the right amount. Okay, and that's the point. Or how about another metaphor, which is nuclear energy? nuclear energy is actually very important. It's reliable. Unlike solar and wind energy, nuclear energy is extremely reliable. You can even control how much energy is produced at any given moment, which means you can produce exactly what is needed. By itself means that one of the most important factors when it comes to selecting it as an energy source. But when it's uncontrolled, it can be devastating, okay? I think that's a very good metaphor. That is to say, within the nucleus of an atom is so much energy that you can destroy the world. But if you come close to it, and if you know how to control the reaction, you can power cities, right? That's amazing. God, to our ancestors, in a sense, is so completely powerful beyond imagination that you can't approach. But on the other hand, wait a minute, if you can just get a little bit, then you'll be able to live. So here's what my analogy: burning bush is like a nuclear reactor. The reactor throws off energy in a controlled environment. To the human eye, it doesn't appear to deplete itself, right? If you understand what's going on with nuclear technology, you put the fuel in a rod, you put the fuel rods in a reaction chamber, and from moment to moment, you don't see the depletion because it's infinitesimal, okay? Over the course of time, of course, it does, and you have to dispose of it. But as a metaphor, it's constantly burning, and it's constantly giving power. And we can enjoy that in that kind of structured way. If we let the reactor burn uncontrollably, it will kill us. I think it's a good analogy, okay? So, moreover, we have reason to think, this is back to Azoni, we have think that God's fire destroys is, in the first place, human beings who are contaminated with evil and sin. So, the idea is that if you are evil or if you are tainted, you're going to be destroyed because God is a judging fire. We see this in God's insistence that he cannot go in the midst of Israel after the sin of the gold calf without consuming them. Where evil exists, God will destroy. This is the image. This suggests that coming closer to God's fire involves exposing oneself to judgment. And here, this is what's happening, okay? Right? Why is it that the people don't want to come close? Because they have perceived the terror, right? And they look at the fire and they look at themselves. They go like, we don't want this, because if we get close to this, we're gonna be consumed because we're evil. But the premise here is that one may survive for a time, remaining evil and corrupt if one remains at a distance. But approaching God and bringing God into one's midst brings the force of God's flames to bear. On this, the righteous will be able to approach God and bear his fire without being consumed. But since no man is entirely free from evildoing and sin, not even the most righteous, if he comes too close, he will perish. Go ahead, Ellie.
When do we get a definition of evil?
Okay, evil is the 10 Commandments, basically, okay? That is to say, the basic things that make for a life that is what God wants are encapsulated in the 10 statements, namely that there is God, that you don't commit idolatry, that you don't worship, that you don't use God for evil purposes, right? You don't, we say don't use God's name in vain, which is, the wrong way of saying don't misuse God's name. In other words, don't justify evil behavior with God. It's the worst thing you can do is to kill someone in the name of God. That would be the most evil thing to do, right? Understanding that killing is evil, right? And so I kill you in the name of God is the worst thing that a person can do, okay?
Boy, it happens over and over again.
Exactly, okay? And I kill you in the name of God is doing evil in the name of God because it disgraces God in the world. And that, if you read the 10 Commandments closely, there's no forgiveness. God will not cleanse a person who does that. The worst thing to do is to do evil in God's name. Okay, that's what the third commandment means. And then Shabbat, and then parents, and then do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not testify falsely, and do not covet. Okay? And so if you do those things, if you shape your life around with those guardrails, that's it. That's the basis of a good moral life. Okay? And if you don't, you incur the fire, basically, and the people are aware that they're not good, and so they don't want God in their midst. Okay.
What about all the generations before the precepts? I mean, when we
So
didn't have this.
some did have this insight, and so we've looked at the idea that there are people, and we talked about this, when Abraham and Sarah go to Avimelech, right? And Avimelech, they fear God, right? They don't want to do anything to Sarah because they have a sense of morality. Or, back a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the midwives, okay? And so the whole conversation about whether or not they were Hebrew or whether they were Egyptian or whether they were non-Hebrew in some other way, the presumption was that there is a certain universal morality that people understand, which is that if someone tells you to kill babies, you don't kill babies, and that you don't need to be Jewish to understand that. In other words, that belongs to all humanity. That there is a certain level of basic morality that is attainable by everyone, and certainly ought to be. You don't need the rules for, but they are living by a certain set of natural rules, of a natural law. Okay, so the awareness that the fire is potentially destructive happened at the burning bush, okay, and also happens later on in a couple of weeks where we'll see this, where God says to Moses, "You cannot see my face. No one can see my face and live." This is This is a familiar way of thinking about the metaphor of God's fire and the danger it poses to human being. But this approach, even if correct, only affords us a partial view of this subject. This is because I've not yet attempted to answer the obvious, crucial question that any investigation of God's fire in the Bible must address, which is this. God's fire, understood as a destroying fire, is an aspect of God that is parallel to his anger, his judgment of evildoing and sin. But what of the other side of the metaphor, the flame as a source of life, warmth? How can the same fire of God that destroys the wicked and even destroys the righteous if they come too close also be seen as the source of life? The question is especially pressing in light of Moses' vision with which the theology of Exodus narrative begins, a bush that burned but was not consumed. And that's where we saw the angel appears. He gazed there. The bush was aflame. It was not consumed. The bush is obviously a lowly thing, a frail thing, whose survival is in any case fleeting and always in doubt. It is, in other words, much like a man and much like the people of Israel. Yet despite this frailty, Moses imagines that man can nonetheless withstand God's fire, containing it within him, and yet not be consumed by it. His vision proposes that what looks like a destroying fire need not be, and that it can be brought into our breasts, into our homes, into our camp. It is a vision of what man could be, of what Israel could be, if God lived among us. It is this vision that Moses refers to as a great sight, and it is this vision that draws him into alliance with God of Israel. And so what I bolded this and highlighted this because I think this is really the key to unlocking the whole story.
Yeah.
Maybe be the key that unlocks the whole Torah for us, and it may be, certainly the key that unlocks the reason why there's so much terror. Moses gets it. The people don't get it. Moses gets it in the vision. The vision is like, aha, the consuming fire that I already understand of God. Okay, so he's advanced. Okay, in a way that you could say he has exceptional pre-knowledge that God is a consuming thing. But if God is speaking to him as a fire through the bush, and the bush is not consumed, the message that he is getting here metaphorically is that you can take this God and you could have God live inside of a community. you can have God illuminate a soul such that a person, a human being, can live a certain way, and that a community can live a certain way, and that God, who desperately wants to be a part of this world, can be a part of this world in a way that's sustainable. So that's the message of the burning bush, and that's the message of God as a fire that's not consumed, and a fire that doesn't consume, and a fire that totally consumes. So we have two questions, Barbara or Steve, and then Bob. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so just in reaction to your previous statement about a underlying morality in the world, and also later on, we should come back to it. We have Hammurabi's codes,
Yes.
which are parallel, or I think the 10 statements. So I just wanted to bring that up. That's all.
So Hammurabi is that would be a different kind of class that compares and contrasts where they differ, and they're quite different. They're quite different because
the point is that there's an underlying morality.
well, there's an structures. Civilizations build themselves on codes too. All codes have murder. You can't murder. You couldn't murder in the Soviet Union either. Okay, and civilizations are dependent on, in some way, the morality of their code. The question is, what's underlying that? And underlying the code of Hammurabi is not the gods, but the sovereign. Okay, and this is where the Bible differs. That there's not, the king is not the one with total power. It's God that has total power. Bob.
So a few comments that I think hopefully relate to what you were saying. And from my limited knowledge of Hasidic thinking, I wanted to just offer that to what degree did the Israelites see the fire as sort of the fury, the anger, the gevura, justice side, especially in light of the Egyptians dying in the Red Sea. And Moses' role was also to sort of see the transformative possibilities that you can be consumed with chesed or kindness and sort of navigating, and the rest of Mishpatim and the laws help people to deal with the anger, the emotionality, all the other things in civil society, but also within themselves. So to what degree is it consuming versus transformative in terms of navigating these things, and Moses' role as the teacher in learning that?
So I think that what Hasidism gives us a lot of insight, and it's also developed through mysticism. And these categories obviously are the categories that are found in the mystical system. And reading that system back into the text here, the people don't have this understanding. The people have a very primitive understanding of God, that God is both liberating and destructive. They do not yet have the understanding of God as compassionate. And they do not have the understanding that God's essence is also an essence of compassion. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but it's important to highlight that this is the drama that's going to unfold over the next few weeks as the crisis only gets worse. The people, Moses, we're running out of time. We're already over time, but Moses, goes up at the end of all of this covenanting ceremony, goes up and spends 40 days. And you know what happens? What happens at the end of 40 days is that the people, having failed the test of fear, they need something tangible. They need to look at something. And so they co-opt Aaron into fabricating the golden calf, and they worship the calf. And that's a primitive understanding of what God is. And then it's at that point that God, says, look, they're useless. I'm going to destroy them. And Moses, and this is Moses' greatest moment in the Torah, Moses says, you can't. If you're going to do it to them, you got to wipe me out of the book too. And he forces God to relent. And then Moses, out of total frustration, says, I want to know you. I want to I want to know your essence. And God says, you can't, but I'll let you have a glimpse of it. And it's at that point that God reveals to Moses the glimpse of God's nature, which is, yeah, I will punish the third and fourth generation. My anger is unrelenting, but for goodness and for kindness, I will be kind to the thousandth generation. Adonai, Adonai, rachum v'chanun, erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, notzer chesed la'alafim. I will be kind for 1,000 generations. So it's, I think, it's back to John's point, which is that God is not a particularly good marketer at what God, is. But then again, it's like, okay, but we're still here. So it's working in the way that it's working, that we've internalized this, and God has also learned something about human nature, and understanding this in a much more anthropomorphic and anthropopathic terms, I think actually is quite refreshing. It says, look, the human beings are a work in progress, and the relationship is a work in progress, and even God is caught through this. The whole Torah is learning and relearning and relearning what it is, and the mitzvot function as, in a sense, ways for the people to learn godliness, and for God to learn what the people are capable of. Okay, I think this is the greatest dynamic in Jewish religious life, is that, here we are thousands of years later, and we're still trying to figure this out. I think that's pretty amazing. Okay. I've only gone to 5 pages of my hand in here, but Moses' vision depends on our understanding of the destructive aspect of God as secondary. In other words, it's the life-giving force of God that's primary. The primary aspect of God's fire would seem to be his ability to set the frail bit of scrub on fire in a positive sense, so that it comes alive with warmth and life. What is this warmth and light that Moses seeks to bring to Israel? I propose that we try to answer this question in keeping with our earlier recognition that the metaphor of the ascent of Mount Sinai is an ascent toward knowledge, and more precisely toward knowledge of God's nature and will. Okay, and on it goes. Sinai is the moment that Israel meets God's essential nature, the moment that Israel is to get knowledge of God. And so I go on and on and on about this, but the point that I'm saying is that we have this dual nature of God, that God is consuming as a fire, but also containable. And Moses has this vision, the vision that if we only manage to take a flame, to kindle ourselves in the way that we can, and make God part of our lives, and make God part of the community, then we'll be able to bring God into the world, and we'll be able to be what God wants us to be, namely a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. People don't like this, okay? And here I'll be contemporary, but I'll be ancient as well, which is, this is as threatening to a modern person as it is to the ancients. The ancients had their own struggles of change, namely, they were coming out of Egypt. How do you expect them to have this kind of apprehension and to have this kind of insight and to orient their lives in this new way? It's impossible. Okay. Similarly, how do you take a person born into our own secular society and put them in front of this kind of piece of information and get them to want to be drawn to it? It can be very intimidating, because what it demands of you is that you reorient your life. And what people do not want most is to change. People like being themselves. And therein lies part of the great struggle, the great challenges of A, religious life in modernity, and B, Jewish religious life, that Judaism makes a demand on you to live a certain way. And it's that part of the demand and that acceptance of accountability and responsibility in living a certain way that people do not want. They'd rather have the bagel and lox and the ethnic and the humor and all of the other things and the peoplehood and all of that, but they'd rather not have the sense of obligation and even accountability and even dread that sometimes is required. They want only compassion. They only want the goodness, and they don't want the judgment, and that makes it particularly challenging. Okay, but then again, look, this is one theology within the Bible itself. The Bible is trying to work this out also, and certainly within Jewish tradition is also trying to work all of this out. It's how do you see God? Is it God as a completely, devastating, devouring fire, or is God, the life-giving force? And I think even within the Torah itself, the Torah is trying to work this out. And I'm just going further here to the end because, as you know, the Torah ends with this kind of statement, which is that the Torah is about life. The final statement of the Torah says this: choose life, knowledge of God's essence, living by that knowledge of responsibility and compassion, judgment and mercy is choosing life. And that's the statement at the end: to walk in his ways, his laws, his rules, that you may thrive and increase. I declare this day that you shall certainly perish. You shall not long endure in the soil. I call heaven and earth to witness you the day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life if you and your offspring would live. In other words, the Torah is all about life, and that the understanding is that life comes with a set of responsibilities, a set of boundaries, if you will, and a set of opportunities. That to live this life, you need to understand these boundaries, and you also need to apprehend the potential of living with God in your life so that you can have a worthy, full, rich, and beautiful life. And so that's part of what's going on here. I think is that, at least the key that I'm offering here is that Moses' vision of the burning bush contrasted with the vision of the mountain is really the point, that we have God as both. God can sustain the world and destroy the world. That God is so powerful that unleashed against human evil, it could be destructive. That God is so benevolent that without God, you have no life. And so that's the basic theology. Go ahead, Ilana, go ahead.
I'm sure everybody knows the Midrash, but Moses already had an experience with fire as a little boy.
Yeah.
So there was a warning through the fire: don't go too far to get the crown for the kingdom or something. And then he got burned, and that's why he was stuttering for life, which also teaches us to be careful not to want too much or to have boundaries. Also, the plague Barad has also the contrast with fire and warm and cold.
Yes.
So
true. You're right, and that's a metaphor also. And I wrote that on the sheet this year about ice and fire. That the miracle within the miracle of the hail is that there's fire and ice also. But I think, look, the metaphor, and many of you may have seen this or experienced this, in watching people. Sometimes people who get so, inflamed by their religious fervor, they are damaged, right? They get damaged by that, and that there is, I think, a deep understanding of human consciousness here, which is that certainly people want to get close and close and close, but in the process of getting close to God, you can actually go crazy. You can be damaged. You can be destroyed. The rabbis have a parable of the four who entered paradise, and it seems to be a parable about about excessive piety and excessive zeal, that, you know, there were four who entered paradise: Rabbi Akiva ben Zoma ben Azai, and Acher, Elisha ben Abuya. So Rabbi Akiva came out unscathed. Ben Azai went crazy. Ben Zoma died, I think, or one way or the other. And Elisha ben Avuya left it all completely. It's a metaphor for saying that when people experience the divine too closely, a lot of dangerous things can happen. Only a person of the caliber of a Rabbi Akiva can experience, you know, that fervor to God and translate it into a normative environment. And of course, Akiva is the analogy to Moses. Moses experiences God closer than any other human being, and only a Moses is capable of translating that tremendous experience into a normative way of life. And I want to say that that's what it's all about. It's taking the experience of God and translating it into norms for life. And so what Judaism becomes then is a way of stitching God into the day-to-day life of, you know, a Jew, which is, you know, I wake up, I pray, I perform mitzvot, I have my Sabbath, I have my holidays, I live a certain way, I conduct my life, my business life a certain way, I take care of my community, and I structure myself around trying to live by the Torah, because that's a way of bringing God into the world. And that's kind of a very simple and compressed way of understanding it, but it's beyond understand. It's, you know, here the image of Sinai is, it's so powerful. God is the nuclear reaction, and we just want, you know, one little, you know, tiny speck of that reaction and put it into our lives. Okay. Well, I've gone on too far. I don't know if there's any other comments. Go ahead, Bob.
I just wondered if you have any comments or any rabbinic comments have been made about the relationship of fire here and fire in the tort law, where fire burns another person's yard, and the goring bull, and that, because I've seen some interesting commentary. So I'm wondering if you've run across that.
Nothing comes to mind. You know, I think, you know, fire is understood, you know, in this context as something, you know, fire is fire, but here it's framed in the context of the divine human relationship. I suppose you can become allegorical about almost every commandment, you know, and that's certainly, you know, the task of the mystics and people who do that. You know, every commandment, every verse lends itself to myriads of interpretations like this. So I'm trying just to get to understand what it says before I need a couple of glasses of wine before I get to that level. All right. Therefore, we'll let it go for now. Thank you all. See you next week.
Bye.